And we're live. Welcome to this week's extra special episode of MicroConf On Air. I am your host, Rob Walling, as always. So every Wednesday-ish, every other Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, we live stream for about 30 minutes. We cover topics related to building and growing ambitious SaaS startups that bring us freedom and purpose and allow us to value and maintain healthy relationships. And a big part of this journey is sharing it with others and experiencing it through the eyes of other folks in this community, this MicroConf Startups for the Rest of Us, the bootstrapped and mostly bootstrapped community. And such a big part of that over the past, let's say 5 to 10 years as it's evolved is the podcast community. And, producer Xander and I started talking about 6-8 months ago about what we could do to promote and recognize some of the best podcasts in our space, because it's gotten to the point, when I think back 10 years ago, it was like, oh, there's this one bootstrapped podcast. And then a couple of years later, it's like, oh, there's another, there's two, there's three. Well, now there are literally dozens, and there's different formats of two founders talking, or there's interviews, or there's a mix of those, there's education, there's all types of pretty amazing content being pushed out for free on a weekly basis. I should know I'm subscribed to way too many of them. I think I'm tipping the scales right now at close to 50 podcasts, not all in the bootstrapping space, but there's just a plethora of really solid information that's coming out. And so through MicroConf, we wanted to put together the SaaS Podcast Awards, which recognize the best bootstrapped and mostly bootstrapped SaaS podcasts out there. And we took nominations about, I think it was 5 or 6 weeks ago before the holidays. And then we had a vote off in the last couple weeks of December, and we are here to talk about the top nominees today and recognize the winners. This is the big announcement people have been waiting for, and I'm going to have a little special guest after that. So let's dive right in to our first category, which is the best company or founder story. The nominees are John Buda and Justin Jackson with the story of Transistor.fm, Lynne Tye with Key Values, Jordan Gall, story of Carthook, Pieter Levels, Levels.io, and Matt Wensing with the story of Summit. And the winner is voted on by you, Transistor.fm, John Buda and Justin Jackson. So congratulations, sirs. They've been telling their story for several years on their podcast. I'm trying to keep so many things in my head. Build Your SaaS. I almost said Building Your SaaS, but they've been telling their story on Build Your SaaS for several years. And if you haven't checked it out, it's definitely something. It's a podcast that was nominated for a lot of the SaaS Podcast Awards. So in several of the categories, we have 4 categories today. I probably should have kicked that off. Best company or founder story, which we've just done, and then we'll look at the best episode next, then the best host and the best podcast. And again, those are nominated and voted on by folks like yourself in this community. Next category is the best episode. Nominees are Code Story, Season 2, Episode 7, Ryan Graciano from Credit Karma. I think I actually use Credit Karma. Software Social, the Feelings episode. That was a good one. If you haven't listened to that, you need to check it out. I'm a big fan of that show. Good Leadership is Ongoing Work. Bold Business Podcast with Jess, Dewell. IndieHackers, writing code to sell $200,000 a month of cookies with Sam Eaton of Crave Cookie. And the last nominee is the SaaS Podcast, MemberSpace, bootstrapping a profitable SaaS company with Ryan, Bennick, and Ward Sandler. And the winner is IndieHackers, writing code to sell $200,000 a month of cookies with Sam Eaton of Crave Cookie. So congratulations to Sam and to IndieHackers and to Cortland for winning that Best Episode Award for 2021. All right, next category is the Best Host. And we have 5 nominees in this category: Michelle Hansen and Colleen Schnettler of the Software Social Podcast, Matt Wallach from the SaaS Story in the Making, Cortland Allen from IndieHackers, Justin Jackson and John Buda from Build Your SaaS, and Ben Orenstein and Derek Reimer, the Art of Product Podcast. And the winner of the Best Host is Cortland Allen of IndieHackers. That's the best episode graphic, but luckily it's the same host. So congratulations to Cortland and IndieHackers. This is, obviously Cortland's been doing his podcast. In fact, IndieHackers really formed out of the podcast. He started building an audience through the IndieHackers podcast and used that as kind of the lever or the basis on which to build this community of IndieHackers.com. So congratulations to him. He's been doing interviews for some years and, obviously a top-notch host. So I'm proud to have them as the best SaaS podcast this year. And finally, our fourth and final category, the best picture category, if you will, is best podcast. And our 5 nominees are The Art of Product Podcast, IndieHackers, Build Your SaaS, Bootstrapped Web, and Software Social. And without a drum roll, sans drum roll, I wish we had a really nice sound effect. The winner of the best podcast is The Art of Product with Derek Reimer and Ben Orenstein. Congratulations, gentlemen. And I actually have an extra special surprise to bring on here. We are going to do a live Q&A impromptu listener questions, and you are able to ask anything you'd like about you can ask about their businesses, but honestly, this is like an inside baseball podcast story. And I really want this episode to focus on what Ben and Derek have built with the Art of Product podcast. So I'd love to welcome the co-host, Derek Reimer, co-founder of Drip, now the founder of SavvyCal, and Ben Orenstein, longtime host of several successful podcasts and the co-founder of Tuple. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
The sweet and sultry sounds of Derek Reimer and Ben Orenstein. So this has to be one of, I'm imagining, just the highlights of not just 2021, but perhaps of the past decade for you guys. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Truly, indeed, yes. And this is great. We begged our listeners for this. We spent a lot of airtime asking for the votes. We got out the vote this year. We toppled the giant that is Cortland Allen, and I couldn't be happier about it.
I couldn't be happier with your tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic tone on Twitter, arguing about how Art of Product deserved it. Oh, it was great. It was great. So truly was a fight to the finish. So
there's
gentlemen.
I just want to point out that I find kind of hilarious, which is, so we won best podcast, but not best hosts, which is great because Art of Product does not have any guests, doesn't have any sponsors. There's not even like intro music. It's basically, so it's like they like the podcast, but not the hosts. So there's something about the podcast that is not just me and Derek talking, when in fact that's all the podcast is that people are into. So I appreciate that.
It is. That is a very adept and astute observation. Derek, do you have any thoughts on that about why that?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess, we have been making decently good radio, I feel like, with, well, I don't know, everything's up and to the right for Tuple, right? But I've been making good radio with Level and with all my trials of the last few years. So maybe my stories precede my actual hosting abilities. I don't know.
I see. And I would say the success story of both SavvyCal and Tuple is, I think something people have been, they've been rooting for you guys for a long time. I mean, back from, so, some folks may not know, but Ben, you hosted a podcast called Giant Robots Smashing into Other Giant Robots. Is that right? It was for ThoughtBot. And that was when there was hundreds of episodes there and Derek joined you at a certain point. You want to give us a little history lesson of what happened there?
Yeah, I hosted 239 episodes of that podcast.
Wow.
Over years. It was weekly, so whatever that is divided by 52 or so.
Yeah.
Derek, so it started off as an interview format. So I was interviewing programmers, and then I kind of moved from being just a programmer to someone who was interested in SaaS businesses. And I started a small SaaS inside ThoughtBot. And as my interest turned more to that, I started interviewing more businessy people, but then eventually started, the show shifted as well as my interest changed. And so I started talking to one of my colleagues, Chris Toomey, for a good chunk of episodes in there as he was sort of doing the same thing. And then towards the end of my tenure there, I invited Derek on, and he was my co-host for something like 30 or 40 episodes.
Yep. And when you invited Derek on, I've heard this story once, but was Derek like, heck yes, Ben, I would love to come on and be your co-host?
No, he was much dumber than that, actually.
As Derek is apt to be.
No. So I sent Derek an email and this is the early days. He was a Drip at this point, And I was like a fan, and I wanted to be friends with him and like get to meet you and like get plugged into the MicroConf world. And so like Derek was like partly my wedge. And I was like, I got to be friends with Derek. And so I was like, I'm going to invite him on the podcast and have him co-host with me. And so I did. And I sent him this nice email, and he was like, yeah, it sounds really good, but like we got a lot going on with Trip right now, and it's super busy. So like, I'm sorry, I can't. And I thought about it for a day or two, and then I wrote him another email. I was like, yeah, I get all that. That all sounds reasonable, but like maybe just do it anyway. And he was like, all right, fine, I'll try it. And I was just kind of like, do it for short term. It's really actually pretty easy. Like we have a producer. It's not a big time commitment. And fortunately, I convinced him to change his mind.
Yeah, I think you could probably you could see through my excuse making, right? Like certainly things were busy, but it was more of a grappling with my own imposter syndrome and like, can I actually do this? I didn't feel like it was something that necessarily came naturally to me. And so I was really nervous when I was first starting out. And I had only really been interviewed on a few other podcasts before that. And they were like the podcasts that I listened to for years. Like I think I did a Ruby Rogues episode and felt like a complete imposter on that, because it's like, I've been listening to these hosts for many years and now I'm going to be on this panel. What does that even mean? So I was grappling with all of that, but I appreciated your persuasion skills, your second ask of like, you might want to reconsider this. It was effective.
Nice. Yeah.
And it was just a part-time thing at first, or not even part-time, but wasn't it like, hey, let's try 3 or 4 episodes, right? That was your wedge.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. I think I pitched it as a trial for like some number of episodes, and then it just worked. And so we kept going.
Yeah, that's great. And then, so we have a comment from YouTube, and apparently folks want to hear an acceptance speech from the two of you for winning this award. So it's all caps, speech. So as if they're calling it out from and any
I mean, I do
speech?
actually feel, all right, I do actually feel a lot of gratitude for the people that voted for this. I mean, we did a long pitch and we did it very tongue in cheek and very silly, but like, yeah, there was a made up internet award and we wanted it, and people were willing to like help us get there, and it feels good. Like honestly, it shouldn't feel this good to win a thing that was invented recently, and it was kind of has no tangible value, I guess, directly.
Yes, it's a made up internet award. Of course, it has tangible value.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, it has tons of
so
tangible value.
Here. Yeah,
the bragging rights are off the chart.
The bragging rights.
That's what it is.
100%. Yeah. To pretend the bragging rights aren't rights is foolish.
Yeah, every time I intro either of you for anything from now on. In fact, that should now be in your bio. Winner of winner of the of the 2021 SaaS Podcast Awards. I need to talk to Xander with these. I guess these are 2021 since we're announcing first week of January, right?
Oh yeah.
So 2021 SaaS Podcast Awards. It's a big deal, gents. Derek, you have words of wisdom?
Yeah, I want to echo that.
Ever.
I mean, it's a lot of gratitude. Like, thank you to everyone who voted. And I think it's fun to get these types of feedback mechanisms from time to time, because one of the weird things about podcasting is, you record these episodes, we sit down every week, talk to each other, drop our files in a Dropbox folder, our editors produce, stitch them together, put out an episode, and then we can see many downloads happen, but we, don't often hear back directly from listeners. I mean, it's compared to the number of downloads, we hear from very few. So this is a really cool, like, feedback loop of like, oh, people actually enjoy this. And so, yeah, makes me happy.
Much appreciated.
When you guys get on the mic, I'm curious, do you feel like you're just talking to one another and you just record it that way? Or do you think, oh, there are going to be several thousand people listening to this episode? Is that in the back of your mind?
It's somewhere in between for me. It's definitely not as comfortable and like fully disclosed as a totally private conversation would be. But I am sometimes surprised at how little the recording impacts me, or like how close to natural we can kind of get. Like, I think Derek and I don't really shy away from asking each other like kind of hard questions sometimes, and talking about highs and lows and like painful parts of running our businesses. So I can't fully get it out of my mind. I'm not exactly the same as if I were just talking to Derek, but I try to get as close as possible because I feel like that's what makes it good. I feel like that's what makes it interesting to listen to.
Yeah. How about you, Derek?
Yeah, I would say the same. I think the longer we've done it, definitely the more comfortable we've gotten with these types of conversations that we have, and so I think it took a little while for me to really settle in, as most podcasts probably experience. But I do notice, and this often gets told to me by listeners too, that like things often get the best right towards the end of the episode. So I think even when we start out, it's like it starts out maybe a little bit more rigid, but by the end we're really getting into a flow state of conversation and stuff.
Yeah, I can see that. I never used to do pre-interviews at all, or, if I have a guest on Startup for the Rest of Us, but I've started now for a 40-minute episode, I schedule 75 minutes. And for the first 15, 20, all we do is chat. And I've started, and then by the time it starts, we're, whether I know them or not, there's just a level of comfort and a level of kind of discourse that's going on. So we have a question from the chat from Orhan Toy. He says, did Ben and Derek, did the two of you ever consider starting a business together?
I have sort of had that in my mind for a long time. And I felt like for me, being in the same place at the same time was a deal breaker. And so like if Derek had lived in Boston, I feel like I would have been like nagging him constantly to do something. But like we just we're never in the same place at the same time, and it never seemed like we were going to be. And so I kind of like had to rule that out because I'm such an extrovert. I couldn't do like a fully remote thing. I think it just wouldn't work for me.
Yeah, I feel like I mean, definitely the more I've gotten to know Ben, the more I'm like sold on his chops as a founder, and would be honored to be on a founding team with him. But I think it's been kind of a matter of timing, of like it just that too, yeah. We've kind of staggered our journeys. It's funny how I've been wanting to do this, actually map out kind of the timeline of since we started podcasting together, to see, because when we started out I was still at Drip, but it was post acquisition, and then I was starting Level, and in that time you left Thoughtbot, and then you were like writing some Haskell for a while, working for a company, and then you did your refactoring Rails. So like there was, we were just kind of flip-flopping between like traditional employment and building startups and stuff. And so kind of a staggered journey.
Yeah, that was
maybe someday I'll get him over here in Boston.
Yeah, no doubt. Once this COVID madness is done. It was so. Remember 4 years ago when I asked you to co-host a podcast with me, it was really to enable me to bring you to Boston and be a founder of a product with me. That's great. So I'm curious. I mean, the podcast has followed the two of you, as you've just said. I mean, Derek was essentially co-founder of Drip and had sold it by the time he was still working at Drip, but he was essentially like a VP of engineering or whatever your title was there. And then you left it and you started Level, and then you're doing SavvyCal. And during that time, Ben also he was employed by two different companies. He did what I would call more of an info product or training course with your refactoring Rails stuff. And then obviously, Tuple software products. So really a wide variety of things to talk about on what most of us would normally categorize at Art of Product as like, hey, this is it's a software SaaS startup podcast, but you've done a lot of stuff that really isn't like I'm the founder of a SaaS product. So what's your take on that? And how do you think it has stayed interesting even when you're fully employed? You're working for someone else, or you're doing an info product that has nothing to do with SaaS. Why do you think that you obviously have had chemistry and the podcast has been good, the whole time? How do you think you've been able to keep that up?
I actually feel like the variety is kind of interesting on its own. Like Derek and I will sometimes joke, like when one of us is struggling or like starting a new thing or blowing something up, it's like, well, it's going to make good radio. And like it actually, to me, the change I think is actually kind of a good ingredient to it. If we had just gone directly to a successful thing and then like we're working on the same product for years, I actually think that would have the biggest danger of kind of getting stale or less interesting week to week. So I think like one of us is going to have to start failing soon. So to address that.
I was going to ask Ben. I mean, obviously, keep going, Derek. No. Sorry, there's a delay.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just going to say like that's what was one of the silver linings of the kind of Level timeline, where it was grueling. It was really tough personally, mentally as a founder, but I knew like the opportunities to talk about the ways that a startup can go wrong and do that on the podcast and do that on the blog were going to be, that was going to be a nice contribution to the community. So there have definitely been times where I have felt like, like showing up on the mic every week was really difficult because I didn't feel like things were going really well. But I also knew that's often the most helpful stuff for people to hear. And so that helps with my motivation. And I just try to keep that in mind, as I'm doing it.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a point, like most podcasts, last 7 episodes or 10 episodes. And especially the ones without 2 hosts, right? Those ones tend to really go. So I'm curious if I guess the real question is, if you could name one thing of how have you, done 255 episodes of this podcast plus another 30 to 250 of the other one, depending on, which person I'm looking at. I mean, how do you feel like you've been able to maintain that level of consistency?
We actually talked about this a little bit recently on our product, where for some reason, podcasting does not really feel like work to me. Like when I see the AOP calendar slot, I'm like, oh, I don't really have much to do today. I'm just doing the podcast in the morning and then some work in the afternoon. And it feels like kind of easy. And I think part of that is that we've outsourced all of the parts that are not fun. So we use Podcast Motor, which has been great for us, where like Derek and I record and then drop the files in a Dropbox. And then a week later, an episode comes out with, notes and editing and all that stuff. So like I only think about the podcast for like a little bit before we record and then while we're recording, and that's it. And just talking about what's going on and asking each other interesting questions and trying to have good discussions. It's mostly fun, honestly. It doesn't feel like a slog.
Yeah, it's become firmly a habit by this point for me. And I think it helps having the accountability of having a co-host. If I was trying to like do a blogging habit or something and I was just on my own, one, it would take a lot more time, like writing blog posts, 6 to 8 hours is on average for me, I feel like. And the podcasts, I mean, I intentionally don't do a ton of pre-preparation. I kind of drop notes in a file throughout the week to like, oh, this could be interesting to talk about, just little breadcrumbs for myself. But other than that, I don't do a ton of prep, and that's partially just to make this sustainable because I'm trying to build a company too, but I think we managed to draw enough out of each other so it stays interesting, but without a huge time commitment.
I think the co-host thing is underappreciated, or perhaps like I don't think I appreciated it until you brought it up just now. If I would never be able to succeed at a solo podcast for very long. In fact, I've started a couple and they usually make it like 6 or 7 episodes. But something about the fact that like I have this appointment with a person and we're going to do it together. And like, if nothing else, I'm catching up with Derek and like seeing how he's doing and like talking about what I've been doing. And it also sometimes makes good podcast content, and that's nice too. Right.
Yeah. It's really nice that you guys, it feels very natural, and that just a casual conversation between 2 people is usually not that interesting, but between folks like yourself and all the other nominees, frankly, that those conversations are pretty captivating to a lot of folks. We have, no. Oh, the shots fired. Okay, so we have a couple more questions from the listener or from the audience. Devin Fitzsimmons says, have either Ben or Derek focused on growing the podcast audience, or have you just kind of let it build naturally?
Occasionally we talk about it. We'll like look at the analytics and go, what could we do to make this go up? And like the things that to do to grow it, I feel like are mostly not things we're super interested in. Like it helps to have like famous guests come on, but like Derek and I kind of like talking to each other. And like I find I don't quite enjoy the interview formats as much as a host generally. And it's kind of a labor of love. Like the podcast is nice in that some people like do find our companies through it. Like it's been super helpful for that for sure. Like a lot of our, I think a lot for both of us, a lot of our early customers initially were like podcast people, and it helps people follow the journey. So there's certainly like business benefits to it. But in a way, I think if our audience, like I don't check the analytics often, and I'm an analytics checker. Like I like looking at the numbers, but for our product, I'm just kind of like, it hovers around where it hovers, and like I sort of just don't care that much for some reason about the podcast.
Eric, other thoughts?
No, that captures it pretty well. I think I think having guests has been there's been certain points where we have a season where we have more guests on and things kind of step up a little bit on the like downloads graph, but it doesn't feel, it always feels like a deviation from the format that our listeners really enjoy the most. And so I think that's where the struggle has been. Like, do we want to do that on a regular basis? And I don't think either of us have felt particularly motivated to, like, it's not worth the potential audience gain to change up the format like that.
It could be also like this is a blind spot. Like, we're just being dumb, and like they're like be smart promotion things that like any savvy marketer would be doing. So don't take this as like prescriptive. Like, just because we do it this way doesn't mean it's actually good.
I mean, in my experience, there really is not a silver bullet for growing podcast audience. Aside from having guests, having them promoted, having these big names on, which is exactly what you're kind of like, don't really want to do that, And that's the beauty of what, much like a bootstrap business, you have a podcast that is something that you love and you enjoy, and so you have it doesn't have to be the Entrepreneur on Fire or what's the guy that just sold to Spotify? These massive, $100 million podcasts. It's like, that's not your goal, and the pressure to do that. Could either of you execute on that? Yeah, probably. I mean, you're building startups that are successful and take a lot of hard work and a lot of focus. And if you focus on the podcast that much, it would probably grow and be really interesting, or have really like large numbers. But when that's not your goal, it's a grind. Like, do you want that to be your job? I think, and both of you are kind of saying, no, this is a fun labor of love that also serves some business purpose. But realistically, you guys have been doing it when it didn't serve a business purpose, when you were working a full-time job and it didn't benefit you at all, other than for probably a little bit of accountability and just the ability to catch up with one another.
Right. Yeah,
all right.
Totally. And so there's this great other benefit too, where I'll like go to MicroConf or just like talking to people on Twitter, and like they've listened to the podcast, and it's like they're already like up to speed on everything, which is kind of fun. It's like they have so much context on things, and people will usually apologize, like they feel awkward about it, or they're like, "Oh, like it feels weird that I know you and you don't know me." And I'm like, "No, that's the point. That's a feature. That's great."
Yeah.
So I dig that. That's just a fun little fringe benefit there too.
Cool perk. Yeah. Last question as we're heading towards time. A question from Qubit, and they ask, having listened from episode 1. Oh, I guess it's not a question, it's a comment. Having listened from episode 1 of Art of Product, I feel old when I find out they have done 155 episodes. So I guess my question to you, gentlemen, is, do you feel old having produced 155 episodes?
Derek, do you feel old?
No, I don't. The funny thing about this is, like, sometimes I look at the numbers and it doesn't feel like it's been that long. It's like longer than it feels like it has been to me. I don't know if you feel the same way, but like when I see 155 episodes plus 40 some odd giant robots, like we're almost to 200 episodes together, but which is spans of many years. But I don't know. It hasn't felt like a long slog, I guess.
Yeah, same. I think it comes back to that sense that it's just kind of fun. And like, also to be fair, whenever we don't feel like doing it, we just skip it. So that probably helps too. There's like that text Thursday morning, like, you have anything for this week? It's like, not really. Let's do it next week. I think that flexibility there, that helps also make it kind of, we rarely force ourselves to do it just because it's, that's the day. That might be part of the key for keeping it, fresh and easy.
Right. Yeah. And avoiding burnout, right? Having to force content is never fun. So, well, gentlemen, Ben Orenstein, Derek Reimer, thank you so much for joining me today. Congratulations on winning the best podcast for the 2021 MicroConf SaaS Podcast Awards. Derek Reimer, you're at Derek Reimer on Twitter, and Ben Orenstein, you're at R00K on Twitter. Great seeing you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Take it easy. All right. Thanks for joining us. That was fun. It was nice to have those guys on. Congratulations to them. And thanks to Hey and Stripe. They are headline partners this year in 2021. If you haven't checked out Hey and Stripe, obviously they're great partners of MicroConf, and we love everything that they're up to. If you haven't already, head to youtube.com/microconf and subscribe, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks for the next MicroConf On Air. Have a great week and Happy New Year.